Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this edition of the CD Storm Show. We have a marvelous array of guests lined up for this coming summer, but right now, our distinguished guests, we are blessed and honored to have in our house today, Brother Jamoul Muhammad from the Nation of Islam. Brother, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I know a lot of people has been waiting for me to have the Nation on the show, and I haven't let you down. You know? How you feeling, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking.
I want to get right into it because I have some things that I know a lot of people want to ask, and it's been on their mind too. And but what attracted you, Jamoul, to the Nation of Islam?
That's a great question. You know, it's a question I've been asking myself for quite some time. And to be quite honest, I'm a child of the late 70s. You know, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And when I think about it, that time period represents the ministry of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, absent his teacher, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So my whole life, practically, and literally speaking, practically, my whole life has been within something I call the Farrakhan factor. So being a child of a black conscious father and being a child of a black mother who grew up in the South, just out of Jim Crow. You know, there was a lot of things going on in our country, you know, just prior to me being born, that I know affected my parents. And the reach of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, as he was the minister here in Boston for several years and went to New York and was the minister in New York. And my father was grew up in New Jersey, so he was caught up in you know, the cycle of influence of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, directly or indirectly. He went to a black college, Virginia Union University, where he met my mother. And so when I think about the climate and the close proximity that he had to the city of New York, being from New Jersey, in the time, being the late 70s and the 80s, and what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was able to accomplish through impact in his ministry as representing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and rebuilding the Nation of Islam, it's almost like I was born for this. And the Nation of Islam was just something waiting to happen to me. And that happened, you know, coincidentally, but on purpose, you know, several years later in the 90s. So I think.
Can you remember the first message that you heard that grabbed you?
Absolutely.
Mine was the Minister Farrakhan's Power. When I heard that Power tape, it just grabbed a hold of me like something else. And then, can you remember what grabbed you?
Absolutely. It was April 28th.
Oh, the day, okay.
1990.
Yeah.
Atlanta, Georgia, Omni Civic Center, approximately 6 o'clock in the evening. And my father, who had been on his journey, finding himself spiritually, he brought myself, my mother, and my younger sister to see the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan as he crisscrossed the country on his Stop the Killing tour.
Yes, I remember that.
And
Stop the Killing tour.
One of the stops was in Atlanta, a very, very powerful lecture that he gave called Add It Up in Atlanta. And I was there live. Being a very young, you know, preteen adolescent, I was in the house of the Atlanta Hawks. I was a huge basketball fan. I grew up playing basketball. And I knew that the Omni Civic Center was just where the Atlanta Hawks played.
Right.
But when we got to the Omni that evening, it was an electricity, a spiritual heightened sense of awareness that I had never witnessed before. And my inquisitiveness was immediately piqued because I'm like, we're not here to see a basketball game. We're here to come hear a man speak whom I've never heard before and I don't know very much about. But I remember him coming out in a white tuxedo with a kente cloth.
Vivid rememoration on that.
Oh yeah, with a kente cloth bow tie, black slacks, white jacket.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the FOI flanking him. I remember his beautiful and exquisite oratorical skill captivating my young mind.
Yeah. How old was you at the time?
I was about 12 years old at the time.
Okay.
And it was exactly what I needed to hear, right on time and in time. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I felt that 90% of the lecture I had never heard before. But it was almost like he was speaking the pulse of truth, of thoughts that I had been thinking and feeling for some time. Yeah. And you know, that was the day that I was found. You know, that was the day that I was born. Mm-hmm. I really do realize that. And it was not only the effect that it had on me, but it was also the agreement effect that it had on my mother and father, that they were in presence together with their children, mm-hmm. witnessing what we all were witnessing, and without even speaking the words, just through body language and eye contact, and
you knew you was hearing the right teaching,
right, and other nonverbal cues.
And you saying your mother and your father was right there with you?
They were right there with me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so great. It was a phenomenal experience for me, one that I will never forget. And you know, the Stop the Killing tour was specifically waged by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to save my life. Mm-hmm. What he was witnessing and what he had been what had been revealed to him at that time, as far as the plot for young boys, black men and brown men in the inner cities, he was compelled to go out on a tour called Stop the Killing. And being a 12-year-old, I would have been right in the middle of that which was planned for me, which we can now look back on as mass incarceration. We can look back on as the war on drugs, which and the crack epidemic, which decimated the black community, and other things like that. So his going on that tour was intentional to go after young people just like me. So he spoke it in words that I could understand. Yes. And from a divinely guided place, he was able to reach me at 12 years old.
Amazing, amazing. I heard you speak about the FOI.
Yes.
And for those who don't know what the FOI, what does the FOI stand for?
Well, the FOI stands for Fruit of Islam. And Fruit of Islam really is the meaning of FOI is it is the military training of men that belong to Islam in North America as taught by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So every man that joins the Nation of Islam mm-hmm. is joining not only the Nation of Islam, but is joining the ranks of the Fruit of Islam, or the FOI, or the training class of men that have been set up by the founder of the Nation of Islam, Master Farrakhan Muhammad, and executed by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then now continued by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
And we see the beautiful Muslim women wearing the white gold. They're not FOIs. What are they called?
Well, their class is titled the MGT and GCC, which is an acronym for Muslim Girls Training and General Civilization Class. So the men have a class, and the women have a class, and then we come together several times during the week to have interactions and class learnings together as members in the Nation of Islam. But there are gender-specific classes specifically for things that are pertaining to the role of men and boys in the Nation of Islam, and how we should be reared and trained, and vice versa with the women and the girls of the Nation of Islam as well.
I noticed that when I go to the mosque, I see the brothers are on one side,
yes,
and the sisters on the other side.
Right.
Now, there's no other church that I go to, and I fellowship with a lot of churches,
yes,
and I see that there's sisters up in the front, and there's me sisters in the back, and to the right and to the left. Why is it that the Nation of Islam separates the men on one side and the women from the other? Can you just touch a little bit on that for me?
Absolutely. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, taught by Master Farrakhan Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, prescribed a learning environment specifically to grab the attention of the black man and woman in a way where we come to our worship service to be educated and taught, versus some of our more traditional spiritual expressions as given to us, and to be frank about it, by our the slave master and the slave master's children on our plantations. And what do I mean by that? When we go to church, yeah, or when we go to other religious organizations, and we fellowship and we worship, yeah, the service typically is one that is derived in the spiritual teachings in the scriptures that God revealed to his prophets, both men and women. But it is more of a type of expression that kind of piques the emotion of the parishioner based in the teachings. But the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave us this way of being educated because he was taught that we had to be retrained and re-educated in our own environment, devoid of the influence of the enemy's philosophy, which at one time made us slaves. So to continue to grab the attention, kind of like what you said earlier, yeah, men sit on one side and women sit on the other side to prevent the natural interaction that happens between men and women. But if you were to put men in their environment and the women in their environment, the attention span is different. Their understanding of what is being expressed from a lecture or a taught service instead, yeah, of a more, a service that's derived in entertainment and whatnot. Yeah. The ability for that individual to accept the truth, which is really contrary in a lot of ways to the way that we were educated originally in this country. And you have a natural tendency when you come in and you have an affinity for someone that you may consider your significant other, that there's a particular emotional connection to that may interfere with your ability to grab hold of what you're hearing, sure, that you may not have ever heard before.
Beautiful sister sitting up here, right, making Google. You're not listening to the minister because you're attracted to it. So I see.
And exactly. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he knew our people,
yes,
and he knew what we were going to come into. Not that all religious organizations subscribe to this type of behavior, but we see, less than what we should expect around the dignity of what we would want our people to come into in the house of worship. So that's why it's been, really disciplined and designed to be a re-education, a particular type of environment that gives way to the understanding of what is being taught and not the feeling and the emotion of what's being taught.
They say that Islam comes after everything else fails.
Absolutely.
And Lord knows we've tried everything else under the sun but trying to be ourselves.
Absolutely.
What is it that the Muslims want? There's on the back of the final call, there's a whole segment of what the Muslims want.
Well, there are several. And just to for the sake of time,
yes,
I won't go through all of them. But a great foundation way to kind of understand that is just freedom, justice, and equality, right? The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us that if we are free, justified, and equal, then we have the ability to be ourselves, and the true nature of man is Islam, or submission to the will of God. See, Islam is just an Arabic word which means peace, which means submission to the will of God, which means one who has completely submitted their will, right? To identify what is in their nature as prescribed by how we were born, how we were given our personality, how we were given our spiritual expression. And the Quran says that each man and each woman has their way. And in Islam, Allah says in the Quran that He's given it to us as a way of life. He's completed His favor onto us and made it a religion, but it is really the true nature of man, coming from exactly how God created the universe.
The word Muslim means simply what?
One who is of peace, or one who submits his will to do the will of God, right?
So if you're a good Muslim and you're a good Christian, it's
the same thing.
Yes,
absolutely. Because Christian means one who's crystallized in the oneness of God, following the example of Jesus Christ. Yes. And we have a saying in the Christian world that Jesus was perfect. Perfect in what way? He was perfect in his submission to what God had prescribed for him to live. And so any good Muslim is a good Christian, and any good Christian is a good Muslim. Absolutely.
You hear that, folks? This is great teachings here. For all that don't know, let me just hook up my mic back up here. This brother and I, we have history. I met this brother when I was incarcerated in
South
Bay prison. That was over 10 years ago. And when this brother came up and gave his first teachings there, and I was there. And this brother's been on a roll ever since. Are you still going to the prisons?
I don't. I go periodically. When invited and when asked. At that time, I was facilitating a study group at South Bay. I don't go as frequent as I did back then, but I do go several times a year as well.
And the brothers were very receptive of you.
Brothers are very receptive, and that kind of goes back to what you said. After all things fail, Islam comes.
Yes.
So what happens when you hit rock bottom? What happens when you've tried everything, as you said? You are relegated back to that which comes natural to you, or your nature, and that in and of itself is Islam.
How does the establishment within the prison? I know the brothers that's in the prison, I know they love when you come up there, but are you relatively well accepted by the establishment? Because I know the Nation of Islam with the establishments out here, they're constantly trying to separate and break us up. Are the prison systems, are they receptive to you coming into the prisons, talking to the prisoners?
Well, I'll put it like this. Not every prison system is the same. Not every federal institution, not every state institution is the same. So, for every one prison system or isolated correction facility that welcomes us, there may be one that does not, right? Do I have those stats? I don't necessarily know them offhand, but the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the prison system goes back to the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad himself, where back in the 30s, the mid-30s to early 40s, he was incarcerated himself as the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he began to influence and teach the prisoners, right? The most unencourageable, the most rejected and despised of our people are those that are kind of left in incarceration and forgotten by society. But his teachings state that, every time you look at a black man or woman, you're looking in the face of God, regardless of their condition. And he began to teach inside the prisons, and the Nation of Islam's prison ministry was born, and it has just been something that has continued, for the years. So there's been a myriad of experiences based on, where we're at and who's in there, right? But lack of, to really answer your question, there has been some institutions and prison administrations that have really welcomed the Nation of Islam, because the teachings represent a spiritual reform. So where you have people that are convicted of heinous crimes and felonies and are living out their sentences behind walls, you see a total transformation in mind, thought, and actions because of the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And whether they may admit it or not, or whether they or whether they know it or not, they celebrate that change in any man or any woman's life in relation to how they receive the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
I heard the Minister Louis Farrakhan said, he said, turn them all over to me. Let the brothers out and turn them over to me, and let me take care of them. And don't say that it can't be done, because they took all the people out of Europe into the prisons and dungeons and sent them over to America, and see what they did. And,
Absolutely.
Minister Farrakhan said, give them to me. But let me ask you, Captain, there's a lot of talk I'm hearing about, and other people as well. And I was asked to ask this question: what is going on? What is all the hating about Minister Louis Farrakhan? Dear brother, minister that he is, guiding us, leading us, teaching us. What is all the hate going on about him? The ADL, the Jewish League, and all these people. Can you touch a little bit about that? I know it's a touchy subject.
Sure. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, I kind of alluded to earlier, his ministry creates an atmosphere.
Yes.
That I coined the Farrakhan factor, and I've heard others refer to it. And just over 2 years ago, he started to teach on the universal cry for justice in response and in reflection of the murders of Trayvon Martin, and Freddie Gray, and Alton Sterling, and Sandra Bland, which culminated into the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, the Justice or Else movement, because he told us, and what he teaches is that the universal cry for truth is one that cannot be silenced, right? And so whenever there's a group of people that experience a certain level of dissatisfaction, change is on the horizon. So the culmination of him organizing the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, 10-10-15, or October 10th, 2015, in response to the mask of civility coming off of the American society by way of some of the killings of unarmed black men, and incidents such as that. I believe the enemies of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan calculated moves, because the universal cry for truth cannot be silenced. And then with the election of our 45th president, Donald J. Trump, has brought about a lot of political protesting, a lot of civil unrest because of his unabashed, opinionated approach to his presidency. And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is still relevant. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is getting ready to turn 85 years old in this May.
Can you believe that? That beautiful brother.
Yes.
85 years old.
And he has an attraction to even the youth. He did two very, very popular, very successful interviews on The Breakfast Club, which is really considered a platform for generations that have come and were born way after the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And so with each turning day, each incident, there has to be something that the enemies of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has to put up to kind of counteract it. To Stop the Killing tour, there were things that were done. After the Million Man March, there were things that were done. So after the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan goes on the offensive, we always, you can always calculate a calculated response. Yes. And so I think that some of that has to do with what we're seeing now in the community, now in the media about the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. It's because he's still relevant. It is because he's still speaking truth to power. It is because he's still affecting people, and it's because he's still saving Black America one life at a time. Whether you join the Nation of Islam or not, you are affected by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's presence amongst us.
Absolutely, we are, whether we know it or not. I heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan just completed an album.
Yes.
It had some of the top artists in the world on this album.
Absolutely.
Is it out? Is it out right now?
It is out right now, and you can order it, via the Final Call .com or the Final Call newspaper. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is a multi-level genius, and music is just one of the things that he's mastered that prepared him for his ultimate destiny, which is to be a leader and a speaker for the voiceless and the defenseless and those that don't have leaders coming for them to rescue them out of abject poverty and ignorance. And so his effect on the arts and culture and the music industry, it goes hand in hand. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was the minister of Muhammad's Mosque number 7 in New York City at the time of the advent of hip hop. And he was the head minister of the city of New York, which had 20 some odd satellite mosques throughout all the boroughs in New York City. And his representation on radio, you know, he did an event called Black Family Day, where he pulled in 70,000 plus New Yorkers to Randall's Island, something that had never been done before. Wow. An event so powerful that the warden at one of the local prisons allowed the inmates to be let out for the day in the hands of the then director of men at Muhammad's Mosque number 7 to go to Randall's Island to hear the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So his influence is unparalleled. And so that ministry and those teachings affected young people back in the 70s, and then we see hip hop, and then you see the early stages of hip hop. A lot of the MCs and the hip hop artists reference his name and the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad in their music. So he is a man that is timeless. He may be in his 80s, but he still relates to the condition and the plight of Black, brown, and poor people, regardless of religious persuasion or station in life. Yeah. He is a transitory figure, and so something has to be done to reckon with that if you want to prevent the rise of the people that he represents.
I hear that there was a saying from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He says, you don't have to tell a man that his glass is dirty. All you have to do, all you have to do is show him a clean glass of water, and he'll know his glass is dirty.
Absolutely.
And I'm saying that because every time I see the brothers and the sisters in the Nation of Islam, they are suited, booted, and Farrakhan recruited.
Right.
And what is the significance of the bow tie?
Well, for our dress code in general, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad wanted us to dress for business, because the building of a nation and the rising of a people, you have to be busy. And part of his teachings was to prepare each man and woman for jobs and works and civic responsibilities pertaining to the needs, wants, and necessities of Black and brown people, right? Yeah. So we had to be prepared for business. We had to be prepared to be disciplined to meet the needs of our people, not just from a spiritual or a religious aspect, but food, clothing, and shelter. And going into our communities, he taught us that going in as a clean glass of water or clean cut, shaven, well dressed would have a unalike attraction to those that we are seeking to save in our communities, because we represent the best of the people that's still out there. We have to go after our masses of our people. Yes, doesn't make any sense to build a nation or to teach freedom, justice, and equality if that does not affect the masses of the people. So the modesty of the MGT or the women in the Nation of Islam and the business acumen and dress of the men is really to meet the needs and necessities of the people that we are trying to go save. And as the old saying goes, you should try to look like what you're trying to be, even if you're not that yet.
My grandfather used to say that.
Right.
It rings off of my head just when you said it. I got a little chill.
Yep.
Yes,
you got to look like what you're trying to be.
You got to look like you're trying to be. Yes, because they are always the neatest, cleanest. most articulate men and women the world has ever seen. Brother Jamoul, man, we got to do a part 2.
Absolutely.
We have to do a part 2, man. I would love to have you in this. In closing, I would just like you to say whatever you want to say to the people. If you have a young mind right here, fresh young mind, what would you say to this young person to encourage them to do better for themselves?
I would say what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan taught me.
Yes, sir.
From the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. God did not create the mind or brain of man and woman to think incorrectly. It is a brain, and brain is the repository of mind, and it is designed to feed on truth. And the more we feed on truth, the more we are aligning ourselves with our true nature, because who we are is going to come out anyway. So if we feed on that which, for example, the human body inclines to the earth. Everything that is in the earth, right, is in the human body. So if you prevent your human body from receiving that which is in the earth to sustain your life, you will one day lose it. But that's the same way with our nature and our ability to create our own reality based on our thoughts, our ideas, and bringing them down into tangible things that we can call into our own reality. So if you want to improve your situation, if you want to improve your station in life, if you want to improve how you feel about yourself, feed on truth. Truth is something that you don't need to prove, because you can always prove it. You don't have the need to prove it. The lie or the false reality is something that you cannot prove. People just tell it over and over again until you start to believe it. Yeah. So it's even easy to sift and separate that which is true from that which is falsehood. So I would tell any young person to go on their journey, to do their homework, to do their research, in an attempt to improve their reality and to improve their station in life, because there's nothing that can stop a made-up mind, and your mind is not designed to focus and move out on falsehood. Yes, that's the way I was at 12 years old. Yes, when I heard the truth coming from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, it put me on the right track. Yes, so I would challenge anyone to go to YouTube. Go to your go to a local bookstore. Listen to some lectures of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Read some books from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And
what is the webpage? What is the website of Minister Farrakhan that they can tune into?
The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. If you just type in FARRAKHAN on YouTube, you'll get a litany of his lectures. You can go to the Nation of Islam .com, www.noi.com or .org. You can get your local Final Call newspaper from any FOI that you may see peddling the Final Call newspaper, and get the teachings from there. Yes. You can just Google things. Yes. Go to your public library. There are books on the Nation of Islam and the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but I would go to the source. And better yet, if you want, I would encourage you to visit Muhammad Mosque number 11, 10 Washington Street, Grove Hall in Boston, where you can hear the teachings for yourself.
There you go. Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for this episode of the CD Storm Show. We will be coming right back at you. Brother Jamoul, Captain,
thank you.
It's a pleasure having you on my show.
Thank you.
And you promise you're going to come back now, right?
I will be back.
Y'all heard that. We're going to keep on to that. Peace and love. We out.